Wetlands have a fundamental role in sustaining both rural and urban ecosystems. Wetlands appear as spaces ready to be built on, but if you do not conserve them, they are going to affect the sustainability of any place. In 2015, when Chennai flooded, one of the issues that really came up strongly was Chennai's wetlands had been indiscriminately destroyed. If we look at water as a receptacle of solid waste, this is the most suicidal thinking. Over the years, the heat in Kolkata is intensifying, and this is in large part because water body areas of the city have depleted. You cannot compare air conditioners with services that wetlands provide. Air conditioners lead to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Wetlands help bring down greenhouse gas emissions. Wetlands function as waste stabilization ponds.
Entire process is natural.
I am a wetland. Sustain me. Keep me alive. I will keep you alive for years and years to come.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining our show, A Dialogue with Sukrit. It's great to have you today, and I hope we have a wonderful conversation ahead.
Thank you, Sukrit, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to some very stimulating conversation with you.
My first question would be if you could just introduce yourself to our audience.
My name is Dhruba Das Gupta, and I am a wetlands researcher and one would say an environmentalist who is basically interested in exploring in depth what wetland ecosystems are all about, what is their worth, and how do they shape our lives. Wetlands are a poor man's ecosystem. That is what I'm interested in exploring through my research and through my work with the community. My basic background is in rural development and community management. And my studies have been covering these topics, as well as I have an interest in ethnology and in anthropology. And so wetlands and the wetlands community and their relationship as an ecosystem with the city, these are some of the things that I have dealt with. Interestingly, my guru, Dhruba Gupta, who brought me into the world of the East Calcutta wetlands, was a civil engineer. And I realized that wetlands and engineering can also have a very interesting and fruitful relationship. We might talk about that a little later when we are conversing about the East Calcutta wetlands, or East Kolkata wetlands as they are called now. So I have my hands in all these different subjects, but my most important focus is on understanding of wetland ecosystems and how they impact the lives of the people, how one understands from this the relationship between nature and the people, which is what ecology is all about. So I'm a learner in ecology. I still don't think it's time to call me an ecologist. I step back from that. But I would say that I am a steward as far as the East Kolkata wetlands ecosystem is concerned.
Ma'am, that's wonderful to know. So, ma'am, my next question is if you could just explain us the importance of wetlands and how we are dependent on it.
So, the total amount of water that is available on this planet is, not entirely usable by human beings. Only about 3% of the available water in the planet is fresh water, according to the US Geological Survey. And out of that fresh water, we have fresh water that occurs in the glaciers, fresh water that is found as groundwater, and fresh water that is found in rivers and wetlands. So when I talk about sources of water, because water is life, Wetlands are one of the very important sources of water that sustain human life. In India, the wetland percentage is about 4.86% of the total geographical area of the country, according to the 2021 National Wetland Inventory Assessment that was carried out by the Indian Space Research Organization and its partners. So, wetlands have a fundamental role in sustaining both rural and urban ecosystems. And wetlands have a fundamental role in long-term sustainability, not short-term. So the interesting twist is that wetlands appear as spaces ready to be built on, but wetlands, if you do not conserve them, they are going to really affect the sustainability of any place. This is both rural and urban. Since my work deals a great deal with urban wetlands, I think we could take examples from urban scenarios and we could really illustrate through an example. For example, the big cities in our country, say mega cities we call them, Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Bangalore, these are mega cities. There are others too, but these are just a few names to begin with. And there's a very funny story that I remember. Chennai used to have, for example, 3 rivers, 5 wetlands, 6 forest areas, and wetlands were actually clusters of wetlands. So I think at one point of time in the 1600s, there were about 350 wetlands, if you talked in terms of numbers. Those went on decreasing. And say about 10, 12 years ago in Kolkata, there was a court case that happened, as a result of which there was a high-powered committee that was formed on wetland issues. And the committee invited citizens' comments from various places regarding what could be the future of wetlands and how they saw wetlands and their conservation within the areas that they were, residing. And very interestingly, one gentleman, a Bengali gentleman who was residing in Chennai, he came up with observations that, East Kolkata wetlands are 125 square kilometers, but for development, we need land, not wetlands. And Tamil Nadu, for example, has the highest rate of urbanization in the country, which is 48 point something %. And so we were told through this gentleman's comments that, land is what is more important. And we smiled. Dr. Ghosh, Dhruba Ghosh smiled and I smiled, and we were checking these comments, and we realized that we had to keep this in our mind. A number of years down the line, in 2015, when Chennai flooded, and there were various reasons that were discussed. There were governance issues. There were issues regarding, poor management of drainage, of water. One of the issues that really came up strongly was that Chennai's wetlands had been indiscriminately destroyed, and Chennai's rivers had been neglected. And so the floods were an outcome or outburst. And this thing would only get worse if governance wasn't improved, if there was not better water management done. You can look at wetlands as resources, as an important sustainability factor, but you can also, along with real estate, look at wetlands as real estate in waiting. And sadly, wetlands have been looked upon as real estate in waiting. And when I look at my city and the urban wetland, which is the most unique in the world, for what we call its wise use, or understanding of what these wetlands are really worth, and trying to preserve by using these wetland resources to the best of the ability by the wetland community. That is what wise use is basically.
Ma'am, one thing I would just want to stop you is you just gave an example that wetlands helps in reducing floods. So if you could just dive in, how does it help you to reduce floods? Because Chennai did not sustain its wetlands and then they faced floods. That was one of the factors. So if you could just understand, how do we get benefited?
Within a city becomes a city when you can ascertain its drinking water resources, its drainage arrangements, and how to manage its solid waste. Along with that, you need to see how much of greenery is sustained, what is the ratio of water to land within the city. Because you have something called microclimate, and wetlands help a great deal in maintaining that microclimate.
What's microclimate?
The climate of a place on a very small scale. When you examine the climatic factors that happen through the year in a city, throughout the seasons, and what are its characteristics, that is what microclimate basically is. You have a macroclimate, which is over a large geographical area, and you have a microclimate, which is where the geographical area is small in comparison to the bigger picture. So the intensive picture of climate in a smaller place, that is what we could roughly call microclimate. So in terms of microclimate, let me talk to you about something which we call urban heat islands. If you have seen over the years, the heat in Kolkata is intensifying and the summer season is increasing, number of rainy days are decreasing.
True.
And this is in large part because the water body areas of the city have depleted hugely. So when it rains, if it rains in great intensity, you have to have receptacles within the city to receive that water.
Okay.
And to sustain that water within it.
Okay.
Wetlands perform that function. So it's very, very important to maintain a certain, let's say, mandatory level of wetlands in the city. When city planners plan a city, then that is very important. So city planners in earlier centuries, when they planned cities, they definitely saw water bodies as a core element in the city's sustenance. And we today have a great fascination for the built environment because we have more energy sources available at our disposal. We go in for a lot of built environment and we disregard very strongly the very important function that water plays in the sustenance of the city. So when we have bursts of rainfall, then water management becomes difficult if you do not have enough wetlands within the city. So wetlands can act as a very important flood buffer, and wetlands can do this for as long as they are allowed to exist. I'll tell you about a little Bengali slogan that was coined by one of the persons from the wetland community that I work with. We were working on a program for the World Environment Day, And he wrote in Bengali, I will translate that, Ami Jalabhumi, amake baঁচিয়ে রাখো, আমাকে বাঁচিয়ে রাখলে তোমাদের যুগ যুগ ধরে বাঁচিয়ে রাখবো, which translated means, I am a wetland, sustain me, keep me alive. If you keep me alive, then I will keep you alive for years and years to come. So this is, in a nutshell, what wetlands are and what we should know them to be.
Can you also explain us what are the other ways that we are dependent on the wetland that we don't know about?
Wetlands provide a lot of what ecologists call ecosystem services.
Okay.
And ecosystem services can mean a wide variety of things. Wetlands can be used to produce food. If such wetlands are close to cities, then wetlands can be used to produce food which will be supplied to the city at a low cost. So wetlands have a very important food production function.
How does that happen?
For that, I will give you the example of the East Calcutta wetlands because that is closest to our place of residence. In the East Calcutta wetlands, for example, the sewage from the city, the municipal sewage that goes into the wetlands, the nutrients in this sewage, they contain a lot of organic nutrients. The nutrients in this sewage, they are extracted through an interesting process called algae bacteria symbiosis.
Okay.
And these nutrients are recovered for three purposes: for growing vegetables, for growing fish, and for growing paddy. They're also used in floriculture. So because these wetlands are so close to the city, all the sewage that comes to the drainage pumping stations in the city, they are drained out by long drainage channels and they reach the wetlands. And then there are a whole lot of subsidiary canals through which they reach different vegetable fields, then fish ponds, and also paddy fields. And for this, what happens is continuously the nutrient gets extracted, and these various elements of food that are grown, vegetables which are grown in what we know as dhapa, fish which are grown in whole lot of bheris or fish ponds which are to the east of the city, and paddy fields. So the nutrient content in the sewage gets utilized for all this. Because these are sewage-fed wetlands, this is what happens. Even for freshwater wetlands, their water is basically utilized to grow food. And this food, when it is given back to the city, that happens at a reasonably lower cost because the transport cost is not much. For example, in the East Calcutta wetlands, there are wholesale markets for both vegetables and fish. And so the retailers come to these wholesale markets quickly on cycles, on other vehicles maybe, and they take back fish to the main markets of the city or vegetables to the main markets of the city, and it is sold. And because the transport cost is less, that is why it's a kind of subsidy that happens. And you can also save on emissions if you're using eco-friendly transport. And so the cost of living in the city goes down. The food cost will be less than what it will be if you have to procure your food from a long distance. So that's a very important ecosystem service that is provided. Those who are the wetland community, they are surviving by providing sanitation services to the city and also by earning their livelihood. So the city has that less of an obligation or responsibility to provide employment, in the sense that livelihood is that form of employment which helps form a stable urban fringe in case of urban areas. In rural areas also, they will help grow food, and then that can be supplied to the city. This is as far as the food part is concerned. Then comes the employment, and then comes the sanitation aspect. There are also other things that happen because of such a large set of water bodies. You can bring down the temperature, the heat that the city feels if the wetlands are allowed to survive. One of the reasons why urban heat islands happen with more and more intensity is because the city is destroying wetlands at an unprecedented pace, and you cannot compare air conditioners with the services that wetlands provide. Wetlands provide infinitely better services. And because air conditioners also lead to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. That's another thing. Wetlands help bring down greenhouse gas emissions by sequestering carbon. That is a very important function. Carbon adds to the heat of the atmosphere. So wetlands capture that carbon and bring down the greenhouse gas emissions. In East Calcutta wetlands, what happens is, because the sewage is treated, it prevents greenhouse gases from reaching the river. So, there's an interesting story about a scheme that we call the Ganga Action Plan. And the Ganga Action Plan it had begun to be formulated from the time of Indira Gandhi. And subsequently, in 1986, it was inaugurated formally. And the idea was to clean the Ganga. Now, it was understood that the municipalities that were located on the Ganga, the cities that were located on the Ganga or close to the Ganga, were not treating their sewage, and they were dumping all that sewage into the river. And the river was slowly losing its ecological vibrancy, and there were a whole lot of other serious troubles happening, and the river water quality was becoming very poor, and that had a chain of effects. So what was decided through the Ganga Action Plan would be to clean the river. And the basic idea was, you intercept the sewage that was being thrown into the river and you divert the sewage so that you can treat it through what engineers call sewage treatment plants. Sewage treatment plants consumed a lot of energy, a lot of mechanization, and in these times of, curbing heat, excess heat, and curbing climate change, this idea of high energy consumption to treat sewage is not so acceptable idea. So, wetlands being used as something called waste stabilization ponds, which brings in the waste, which cleans the pollution, and gives the water back to the river.
How does this happen?
Calcutta is the best example of this. Once upon a time in Calcutta, the sewage used to be disposed of in the Ganga. And say about 2 centuries ago, it was found out that this was not the best thing to do, and it was causing a lot of communicable diseases, cholera and diarrhea and all of these things. Cholera was very high. Yeah. So what was the best thing to do? The city parents decided that the drainage had to be away from the Ganga. And therefore, the city sewage was drained from the west to the east direction. And one point of time, when the river Bidadhuri used to come very close to the city, the sewage was disposed of in the river. But that same river was used for navigation purposes also by the British. And there were a whole lot of problems that happened as a result of various interventions. So the river receded from the city and went away. And then what happened was that there was a huge crisis in the city, and the Calcutta Corporation at that time invited a a really well-known engineer whose name was Dr. Birendranath Dey. He came back from London, where he was very well established in his practice, and he kind of devised a scheme called Dr. B.N. Dey's Kulti Outfall Scheme. Kulti was a river that was 17 miles away from the city, and he devised an engineering solution, which was a pair of long flowing channels would be carrying the sewage away from the city to the river Kulti through a distance of 17 miles. Now, what happened was, earlier, when the river Bidadhari used to flow very close to Calcutta, there were what we call salt lakes or salt marshes, which are a very old part of, it was not Calcutta at that time. At that time, it was salt marshes, meaning Sundarbans was like right at our doorstep. It was such a huge geographical area. So, Bidadhari used to flow through the Sundarbans area, and it had a lot of intertidal marshes which were close to the city. So, what happened at one point of time when the river Bidadhari used to flow, there used to be a lot of what we call bheris or huge fish ponds that used to use the water of the river and practice brackish water fishery. With the disappearance of the Bidadhari, what happened was, when the sewage used to come into the city, then the sewage flew out of the city through the long lead channels, and this sewage began to be used as nutrients for growing fish in the same place where earlier brackish water fishery used to be practiced. So there was a transformation from a saline wetland ecosystem to a wastewater-based wetland ecosystem. The pioneer of this was a Bengali entrepreneur called Bhavanath Sen, who started this co-recycling. We might come back to this a little bit later. Who started co-recycling, where the solid waste of the city and the sewage of the city both get treated, and then the water flows out, and then the water reaches the river that will receive this treated water. So Bhavanath Sen, what he did was on a smaller scale at Dhapa, but when these pair of long lead channels were built, and this work began somewhere in 1935-36 and completed somewhere around 1953. And then there were a whole lot of other engineering interventions also that took place between 1936 and 1966. The whole ecosystem underwent this transformation, and what happened was that the solid waste as well as the sewage of the city both got treated comprehensively, so just outside the city, and saved the municipal corporation a lot of costs that it would have otherwise incurred trying to treat the sewage through mechanical means. That's very, very costly. Costs crores of rupees in installation and maintenance. So that the wetlands played this function. Wetlands functioned as waste stabilization ponds and treated the sewage before disposing in the river Kulti. So what the Ganga Action Plan had actually attempted to do, interception, diversion, and what the wetlands did here was treatment. So it was a closed loop. Interception, diversion, treatment. Most of the other cities along the river Ganga, they did interception and diversion, and then treatment through mechanical means. This place, what it did was interception, diversion, and through natural means, through ecological means, it did the treatment.
So the entire process is natural. There's
Absolutely.
no man-made mechanical techniques happening in between.
The entire process is natural. By using nature's means, these things are being facilitated. And that is why these wetlands are such a unique example in the world, something that could be replicated in other parts of the world. Earlier, wherever there was a crisis of water in whichever country, people were forced to think about how to use their wastewater. And today, Sad part is only 37% of wastewater in India used to be treated. Maybe that's gone down a little bit, but roughly 37% of wastewater in India is treated. But this system of waste stabilization ponds is not thought of in a bigger way. This should be done because we have a lot of municipalities which do not have enough of a budget, and they cannot opt for highly mechanized versions of wastewater treatment. So they need to opt for options like this, which are natural and which cost less and which employ people and give returns. And that is what urban sustainability is all about. 68% of the population in the world will be living in cities by 2050, according to the United Nations World Urbanization Prospects Report. And if we are going to have such a high level of urban population, then we really need to think of these natural options of wastewater treatment because they ensure sustainability, they keep the natural environment alive, and they ensure that humans and nature have a mutually beneficial relationship and they can enrich each other. And we will definitely reap the benefits of that if we are willing to think this through and if we are willing to incorporate wetlands as an important aspect of city planning and governance.
Beautiful, ma'am. Ma'am, what thought I had is, we already touched that, people want to build on these wetlands. What are the other major problems surrounding the wetlands?
So, wetlands have to be sustained just as much as human beings have to sustain themselves. If we want to live and grow and move forward, then as human beings, we need to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, we need to maintain our health. Wetlands also have to have their health maintained. And one of the important things regarding maintenance of wetland health is to educate people to stop treating wetlands as solid waste dumping grounds. I'll give you a very weird example or odd example, I don't know what you will call it, but I have seen people piously worshipping God, using flowers every morning or during big pujas, big festivals, using lots of flowers. And then maybe when the next day the conservancy worker from the municipal corporation comes to collect all your solid waste that you have to dispose of every day, people are unwilling to give all those flowers into the conservancy dumping site or the cart that they bring along with them. So what do? The first thought that comes is put all the flowers in a plastic packet, tie it up, and throw it into the nearest water body that is available. And I have seen this happen in water body after water body and also in the canals. If we look at water as a receptacle of solid waste, this is the most fundamental suicidal thinking that we are indulging in. And we are endangering our own existence. I can only think of Kalidas and the famous story where he was sitting in the tree and cutting the branch in which he was sitting. And there are lots of interesting observations on these and lots of funny, observations about Kalidas dal kata, basically. But this is what we are basically doing. We are endangering our own existence in full knowledge that wetlands should not be used as receptacles of solid waste. Neither should canals be used as receptacles of solid waste. Our own sense of existence where we understand what are our resources and what is our duty to protect them, so that we ensure our own existence. That is very important. That is something that is really lacking in in the psyche of urban dwellers, and it is something that has been going on for decades and decades with very little attention. I mean, I really don't know how it is that we call ourselves educated, but we do not understand that these are the fundamentals of an educated human being, to think how we can exist sustainably and how we can allow others to exist sustainably.
What are the different ways in which we can preserve our wetlands that would benefit our citizens?
The first thing I can think of is wetland governance. We need properly defined wetland policies, and every state needs to have a customized wetland policy. In our country, as far as the legal framework is concerned, we have an Environmental Protection Act, and aligned with that, we have the Central Wetland Rules, which were there in 2010 and then amended in 2017. And that specifies that a lot of things have to be done. Nonetheless, every state has a different geographical characteristic of the kind of wetlands that are found in that state, the climatic factors, the other geographical elements, whether it is mountainous, whether it is plain land, etc., whether it's desert. So India is a very diverse country in that way. And so every state needs to have its separate wetland policy. In West Bengal, I think it was the first state where some attempts were made at formulating a wetland policy, but subsequently that became very quiet. But I think that should be resuscitated. We have about 12.36% of geographical area as wetlands in West Bengal. And what is important is that wetland policy needs to be done in consultation with the people who are involved in conservation of the wetlands or who use the wetlands. So it should be a good participatory exercise, which is lacking today. But wetland policy needs to be formed. And if we try this can bring lots of benefits, because I know of civil society organizations who have tried to do consultations around wetlands, which have been very, very informative and which have definitely helped in bringing up points which our administrators should know, those who govern us should know, that will help preserve the wetlands. If we talk about the other aspect of how to conserve wetlands, then we need to have what we call stewards. So a steward is a caregiver. So if I talk about stewards, then the first person that I will always acknowledge is my teacher, Dhruba Das Gupta. When he discovered these wetlands, it was absolutely serendipity. And this was in 1980-81, when he had just about completed his PhD in ecology. He was the first first student in the Calcutta University to think of doing a PhD on the subject of ecology, combining civil engineering and ecology. And he had just completed that. And so the other engineers who were his colleagues, they used to look upon him with a mixture of, kind of queer feeling, because engineers in those days never used to do PhDs. And then Finance Minister of Bengal, Ashok Mitro, he had heard from somewhere that, wastewater can be used. And he had asked the State Planning Board to find out how wastewater could be used, what could be done. So, lo and behold, my teacher used to be at the State Planning Board at that time, and he was told, this is what the minister wants, and now you have to kind of find an answer to this. So then he asked the others, how do I find an answer to this? What happens to the city's wastewater? How do I find an answer to this? So they said, if we knew, we wouldn't tell you to do this work. So here we are buying you tickets. You go to various cities in the country and you see what happens, what they tell you, how they, what do they do with their wastewater. So he thought, if I go to a different city and if I ask, what do you do with your wastewater? And if they ask me back, what do I do with my city's wastewater? I wouldn't have an answer to give them. So he did what very few people today do, used his common sense. He went to the long drainage canals, which Birendranath Dey had built at one point of time, 1936. He went by the side of those drainage canals and started walking to see where they led to. And he saw that where these canals were leading to, there were huge ponds, and there were people who were there inside those ponds, and there were a lot of fish, and he was seeing all of that. And he realized immediately that he had found the answer to the question that was asked of him. And it was not even 15 days. He had been given a time period of 1 year. It was not even 15 days when he found the answer. Being a civil engineer, he knew that these were oxidation ponds, shallow ponds, where sunlight reaches the pond bottom, and, through photosynthesis, there is growth of phytoplankton and zooplankton in these places, and the fish feed on these, and the fish farmers, they farm the fish, and so this is the livelihood. The sanitation treatment is happening, and this is nature and human beings all interacting with one another. So he coined a beautiful phrase which is called living creatively with nature. And so what he saw was the community living creatively with nature. And he used to say, give me poverty and sunshine, and I will give you food, employment, and sanitation free of cost.
Beautiful.
That is what was literally happening, and he became a steward of this ecosystem and devoted so many decades of his life to it.
Everything was flourishing in this system.
Everything was flourishing in this system. And so, at that point of time, it was around the time when the government of India was sending circulars to the different states regarding the Ganga Action Plan. And he was, trying to find out how best these wetlands could be preserved. And he met the urban development secretary, because the urban development departments in the various states were put in charge of the management of the Ganga Action Plan in their part of the state. So he approached the urban development secretary and said that you must come and see this. And the urban development secretary was convinced, but we needed political will and what could be done to do that. So he went and approached the Chief Minister's office, and he invited the Chief Minister to come with him to one of these big fish ponds that was by the side of the big road which we call Eastern Metropolitan Bypass. So the Chief Minister went with him, and what Sir did was he took a glass, filled it with water from the pond, and drank it before the Chief Minister. And everybody was aghast. What is this? What have you done? What is going to happen to you? They were all shocked. And the Chief Minister wasn't saying anything. He rarely smiled. But he just asked, nothing will happen to you? So sir said, nothing will happen to me, sir. See, I don't have a laboratory. So I showed it to you in this way. The hydrochloric acid that I have inside my stomach, that hydrochloric acid will take care of any little nuisance that might be found in this water. But I am telling you, this is your sewage treatment plant. Sir, I have a request of you. You are part of that committee that manages the Ganga Action Plan. And you have a very important role. The Government of India respects your views. I have one thing to ask you. Do not allow a single rupee to come to the city of Kolkata for sewage treatment plants, mechanical sewage treatment plants, because this is your sewage treatment plant. This treats your sewage, this provides employment, this cleans pollution, this subsidizes your city living. Sir used to call Kolkata an ecologically subsidized city. So this subsidizes your city living. The moment they talk about mechanical sewage treatment plants for the city, please oppose it. Do not allow any money to come in. For many, many, many years, not a single rupee came to build sewage treatment plants here.
And it was done naturally.
It was done
without
naturally.
spending any amount of money.
Yes. So, this is what stewardship basically means. That you understand the ecosystem and you care for the ecosystem till the end of your time. When I met Sir was the first steward that I look upon. And when Sir initiated me to be a steward, it was something like this. I met him in 97, 98, worked with him for 20 odd years before he passed away in 2018. And the beginning of that journey was, I had gone to listen to his lecture. He used to be teaching environmental management at the Institute of Social Welfare and Business Management, which is the oldest management school in the country. And subsequently, we did conversations around wetlands, and I gradually developed an interest. And it was a couple of months down the line, he took me to the wetlands without telling me that he was taking me there. He said, we will go to an interesting place today. And so I went with him, and I was taken up this 2-story building, which gave a panoramic view of the wetlands. And I stood there breathless, and I was really not ready for that, because my own personal innings with the wetlands began when I was very young, but that began with wetland plants, which I used to love to eat. My relationship with the wetlands began with the palate, and those were freshwater wetlands. These were sewage-fed wetlands, which were very different in character, but which really took my breath away. And we stood there in silence, in reverence. And he told me, you have a lot of fire in you. Use it for the good of the people. In those 2 sentences, I think I got initiated into stewardship. And this was going to be a lifelong relationship. You need stewards. To protect wetlands, you need stewards. Because it's very difficult to make people understand the value of wetlands for their own personal existence unless you understand the subject through your own life, through your own living. Without that, it's very important to make people understand why they must do anything that helps conservation. So stewardship is important, and stewardship means that you begin to explore every aspect that is connected with wetlands and with people. So we have talked about policy and about governance and about how administrators should be able to create a framework for governance and for preservation of the wetlands. Then comes people like me who are stewards, who are needed for wetland conservation, because you need some really long-term thinking kind of people. And stewards are just that. And you need to understand the wetlands through the eyes of the community that conserves them. So, to take the example of our East Calcutta wetlands, there is a huge community, let's say directly and indirectly about 130,000 people depend on it. And wetlands means a combination of land uses, basically all those things that help treat the wastewater, which means vegetable growing, which means vegetable fields, then fish ponds, paddy fields, floriculture spaces, the places that do the economic transactions, and the people who stay in the wetlands to practice the actual livelihood work and the conservation work along with that. That is the wetlands community, and they should be listened to in order to understand what to do to conserve these wetlands, to save the city hugely in costs of living. I'll give you a small example about how much we save, how much an ordinary citizen in Kolkata saves. And this will hold good for all the other people in other big cities. So in the US, for example, a senior citizen pays about 75,000 rupees a year for getting water services and for sewage treatment. 75,000 rupees a year. And in Kolkata, we pay nothing. So that is the kind of cost we are looking at, and the cost savings that we are looking at. And for that to continue, we need to allow this wetland community to survive. We need to listen to them, because, wetlands need to be cared for to survive. And here we need to care for the wetlands in such a manner that we need to, keep the canals and the interconnectedness of the wetlands and the fish ponds in good health. Then the wetlands will survive. They won't survive just by themselves, and they will definitely not survive if we just build over them. So this interconnectivity between administrators, community, conservationists, and the wetlands, this is the big picture, this is the ecology that we must all understand for our own benefit. So, this will be a sustainability story that will be very long-lasting. This is the most important understanding that we need to develop for a secure future.
So, ma'am, how would cities and wetlands survive together in the coming days?
It reminds me of a rather amusing story. I told you that wetlands need stewards for survival. And I cannot somehow stop myself from narrating a little incident to you. East Calcutta wetlands, they were rediscovered in the early 80s by my teacher, and subsequently they got a life of their own. People came to know about them from all over the world, and it was gradually realized that they needed not just national level attention, which they got at the time of the Ganga Action Plan, but it also needed international level attention. And it was thought that approaching the Ramsar Convention, which is the earliest convention to do with environmental issues after the Second World War. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands and Waterfowl Habitat was formulated and passed in 1971, and India became a signatory in 1981. And the first wetland that got Ramsar recognition was the Chilika wetland in Orissa. And it's a very beautiful wetland, and it has a lot of functions. Wetlands are, in fact, called the world's, supermarkets. So there are a lot of important things that happen with every wetland. Now, as far as the East Calcutta wetlands are concerned, East Calcutta wetlands got Ramsar recognition in 2002, about 20 years, a little more than 20 years after they were discovered. And what happened was that when, one was being able to find out, when Sir was able to understand that even after such an important Government of India recognition as a natural biological sewage treatment plant by the Government of India in the early 90s, under the aegis of the Ganga Action Plan, even after that, that was not enough to really get this wetland sustained without intervention from land sharks. So early 90s, there was also a court case by an NGO called the People United for Better Living in Calcutta. But even after the court case and the first environmental judgment in a court of law in India, even after that history was created, there were still difficulties. It was decided that in the Ramsar Convention, there were a number of categories as to under which category a wetland would get recognition. And in 1993, there was a book that was brought out by the Ramsar Secretariat, which was a guidebook on wise use of wetlands. And East Calcutta wetlands was selected as a tutorial ecosystem out of 17 case studies all over the world. And it was the only case study from India which got this recognition. So that fact was used, and a couple of other facts were used to write out an application to be submitted to the Ramsar Secretariat. But, you need political will for these things, and political will was not much there. So the then Urban Development Secretary, I think it was the Environment Secretary at that time. Yeah, then Environment Secretary and Dr. Ghosh was there at the Environment Department at that time. They filled all the papers, and there was a real brainwave when it came to the minister's signature. One day, after 6:30, the minister generally never wanted to remain in office for a long time. So there were these piles of papers for signature, and they came up, and the minister kept signing and signing. After 6:30, he got fidgety, and he said, okay, I'm going to sign all these in a hurry. And all of those are signed in a hurry. And the application for Ramsar status, that also got signed in a hurry without much thought. And then it went to the Government of India. Dr. Ghosh paid a price for this. Subsequently, after Ramsar Declaration, Dr. Ghosh paid a price for this with his own professional life. There was a lot that he had to stand up to. They stopped his pensions for 5 years. And stewardship is not for the faint-hearted.
It requires a lot of sacrifices.
Yes, it requires a lot of sacrifices. But if you are a steward, then you will always think about how the ecosystem benefits.
And the larger good. For the future as well.
Yes, and the larger good. Wetlands always need a steward. When you talk about, how cities and wetlands can survive together, first, you need political will. That's important. And very often that is lacking in most cities of the world. Then you also need good governance and good urban planning, wise urban planning. You need to plan with a look at the future, at the possibilities of growth or shrinkage of the city. You have to look at a lot of scenarios with intense debate and brainstorming. Only then can you plan for wise use of the city space. And you need wise use of the existing wetlands. You need all of these three things together when cities and wetlands can survive together and in a mutually symbiotic relationship. And in all this, the most important part is played by the human beings. They are the ones who need to understand that the wetland sustains them, and they need to work towards sustaining the wetlands. For our wetland, for example, the canals and fish ponds have to be resuscitated. And they will then give manifold returns so that the city can survive and the city can be ecologically subsidized for many years to come. And for the people dwelling inside the city, they need to be more aware of these wetlands because of the benefit that the wetlands give to them, and not think of building in the wetlands so that they drive the community out and the wetlands collapse. This mutual understanding is something that can serve as a template for the survival of any city in our country. That is something that we need to realize. And we need to think in terms of smaller cities, maybe smaller cities which are going to be formed in the future can plan better to have wetlands as a compulsory component that will save them from many, many hazards in this age of changing climate and, poor air quality. Wetlands are a blessing. Wetlands are a never-ending source of good things that can happen to human life if you allow the wetlands to survive. So like this wetland community person said, আমি জলাভূমি আমাকে বাঁচিয়ে রাখো, আমাকে বাঁচিয়ে রাখলে তোমাদের যুগ যুগ ধরে বাঁচিয়ে রাখবো. So I am a wetland, allow me to survive. If you allow me to survive, then I can allow you to survive for ages and ages.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful conversation. For people who actually don't know about wetlands and conserving them, and I hope this benefits a lot of people and they start speaking about this topic more.
Thank you very much, Shukrit. It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope very sincerely along with you that this reaches people and touches a chord in their hearts so that wetlands survive and people survive together.
Thank you, ma'am.